Acts 24. Well, we read here in Acts 24 of how Paul was left in prison. He spent a few years in prison in Palestine before he was taken to Rome, and he spent more years in prison there. Paul in his letters so often expresses frustration with his chains. He was obviously thinking that he could have achieved far more for the Lord if he didn't have those chains, if he were free rather than imprisoned. And we too chafe, don't we, at the ties that bind in life. And unlike his time in Rome, we have no recorded letters that were written by Paul whilst he was in prison in Caesarea or in Palestine, in Israel. But tradition states that he and Luke spent that time composing the Gospel of Luke and the book of Acts. Perhaps he needed that kind of breather in his life's path. We might feel we need such breaks, but it's better to let the Lord give them to us than to, as it were, make the assumption that we can map out our own path. Now, the letters Paul wrote from Rome are very, very deep and profound. Although he was inspired by God's Spirit to write what he did, all the same, they were, in one sense, still his own thoughts that he wrote. So I suggest that as he sat in Palestine in prison for at least 2 years, he worked out those ideas which he was later going to write down. Well, we all tend to think that God kind of needs our works, that actions are what God wants more than anything else. And so there arises in all religions a kind of tendency towards doing works. But God doesn't need works. What he wants is our heart, our thinking, our attitudes toward him. His desire is for us to produce spiritual fruit. And the parables about vineyards, both in the Old Testament and in the New Testament, they all make this point, and that fruit is the fruit of the Spirit. That's the fruit that God wants out of us as the vine or the vineyard. And the fruit of the Spirit, Galatians says, is love. Joy, peace, long-suffering, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, etc. God wants those characteristics, and because he knows how we are built, how we are each individually wired, he may give us times alone to develop them, or times when we actually can't do any works, perhaps through sickness or our family, domestic situation, issues at work, or whatever. There is no chance, there is no random at all in our lives. These times are valuable because they're intended to help us develop fruit. And God has given us actually the optimal environment in which to produce fruit for him. And that's what Paul had to learn through those years of sitting around in prison. So all this helps us not to be so frustrated in life when things don't quite work out as we think they might do, should do, ought to, or would have been better if it had gone like this.